The next category is press, national and international recognition. The regulations specify that the alien needs evidence in major newspapers or trade journals or magazines as satisfying this category. What is major media? Newspapers that have a national circulation would be major newspapers. Magazines that have a wide following, for example, certain glossy magazines that people have, or design magazines, would be magazines. Trade journals can be the same thing. It can be magazines for design, or they can be specifically magazines that are read by the trade. If you have a newspaper that does not have a national circulation, then there's a possibility that you do not qualify for this category. And so this is something that the attorney has to work with the artist to kind of make that determination if they have national or major newspapers. This can be in the United States. It can also be in a foreign country. That's fine. We just have to be prepared to document that. Feature articles about the artist are most favored. So if you have a review or an interview where the artist is featured, that would be very strong evidence. If you have a mention of the artist in a major newspaper, like if you have the mention of an artist in the New York Times as among a group of other people, this may or may not be sufficient evidence for that category. It's really going to depend. Every article should be followed by evidence to show that the publication is important. The way that my office puts these files together, we put in evidence of the article, and then we put in evidence of either the circulation of the newspaper or information about the publication. Circulation information is something that immigration asks for. The circulation should be tied to the type of information that is included. So if you're talking about a newspaper, you have to give the circulation for the newspaper. If it's a website, you have to give the circulation for the website. Often websites have information about the publication, and there may be readily available information about the publication in other ways. We've also seen press about a publication. So you could have evidence of a publication come from an article in another publication. For example, the New York Times might mention that a certain magazine is important, and if you have that evidence, that's one way to determine that it is a major media. We've also used expert testimony to confirm that a publication is important. If you have a magazine in a country and there's no circulation information, sometimes an expert opinion from someone in that industry can help make that determination that the publication is important. Some attorneys, including my office, have a publication called World Press Trends, and that is a list of all of the major newspapers in each country in the world. And that is something that is a very useful resource. That only applies to newspapers, but it is a good resource. Online articles and articles in local newspapers and lesser known magazines may or may not satisfy the press category, but they can still add value to the application. As I mentioned earlier in a prior segment, if you have press about an event, you can show that that event is prestigious. So there are reasons to gather what we would call minor press. So even if the press doesn't satisfy the press category, it can still be helpful in an application. There are some artists, such as photographers and illustrators, that have name credit for their work in a magazine. We'll call that editorial credit. Editorial credit is published material by an artist, and the regulations actually say it's published material either by the artist or about the artist. And so if someone writes an article or if someone has editorial work in a magazine, it's actually really strong evidence about their career, and it shows that they're prominent, because not every illustrator can have a credit in a magazine. Not every photographer can have a credit in the magazine. Some artists will write articles. Curators often write critical articles in different art magazines. And so there are examples where the artist will write an article. So that is something that we have to think about as well. I'd like to mention that translations are very important. There's certain formatting requirements by USCIS. They generally recommend that a translation is complete. And so it's a difficult thing if the entire file is in a foreign language and we have to make a determination what should be translated. Again, this is something that you really would need to speak to your attorney about so that perhaps the evidence can be reviewed before you make a recommendation for what needs to be translated. There's certain formatting for translations. Again, you have to discuss this with your attorney. The translations have to be properly certified, and if you do everything the right way, it's a way that you can improve your application, because there's certain people that are not really aware of the importance of translations, and if you have an application that is, say it's okay, not necessarily the best in the world, but you do everything right, you have really strong documentation about a publication, you have your translations formatted in the best way, it can really make your application stand out. It can really, really help. So that's what I can tell you about published material.